The Silent Train, An Introspective Journey Through Modern Loneliness. Section 1. The Arrival, Chapter 1. The Watcher Boards. The train arrived with a screech of brakes, a metal beast exhaling steam and motion. The Watcher stepped aboard, his boots clicking against the hard floor as he passed rows of passengers cocooned in their digital worlds. The air carried the faint scent of damp fabric, overheated plastic, and the sharp tang of spilled coffee. The Watcher's sketchbook rested under his arm, the edges frayed from years of travel. This was his first time riding the commuter train in months, maybe years, and yet it felt timeless, unchanged. The doors hissed shut, sealing the carriage in its peculiar quiet, the kind of silence punctuated by the rhythmic thrum of the train's engine and the faint, tinny echoes of music leaking from someone's earbuds. The Watcher paused in the aisle, taking in the scene. A young woman sat by the window, her face bathed in the cold glow of her phone. Her finger flicked upward, endlessly scrolling through a stream of content. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders hunched as though shielding herself from the world. Across from her, a man in a rumpled suit furiously typed on his phone, his brow furrowed in what appeared to be either concentration or frustration. Nearby, a teenager slumped in their seat, headphones clamped over their ears, eyes glazed over as they stared at a game on their screen. It was a tableau of modern life. People physically close, yet worlds apart. The Watcher imagined the strands of invisible connection that tethered each passenger to someone far away. A mother texting her child, a colleague sending an urgent email, a friend sharing a meme. And yet, in this shared space, those strands seemed to fray, dissolving into the void between them. The Watcher settled into a seat near the middle of the carriage, his sketchbook open on his lap. He preferred this spot, a vantage point that allowed him to observe without being noticed. He pulled a pencil from his coat pocket and began to sketch, letting his eyes drift from one passenger to the next. The young woman by the window was first. Her hair, dark and slightly unkempt, framed a face that seemed tired beyond its years. The Watcher imagined her story. A graphic designer, perhaps, working late into the night on freelance projects. She'd moved to the city to chase a dream but found herself drowning in deadlines and debt. That weary look? It was the weight of ambition, tempered by the creeping realization that success might never come. In the Watcher's sketchbook, she became something else, a solitary figure standing in a storm, clutching a tattered umbrella. The rain fell in jagged lines, each drop an unfinished hope. Her phone, in this imagined world, was a lantern casting an eerie glow, illuminating the shadows she feared most. Next, the man in the suit. His fingers moved like machine pistons, typing with a force that suggested desperation. He wasn't drafting an email to his boss, the Watcher decided. No, this was a message to someone he'd hurt. Perhaps a child he hadn't seen in years, a child who no longer answered his calls. His jaw tightened as he read and reread the words he had written, his thumb hovering over the send button. The Watcher sketched him as a man standing at the edge of a chasm, the message in his hand, a fragile bridge stretched across the void. On the other side of the chasm stood a faceless figure, small and distant. The bridge would never hold, the man knew it, and yet he lingered there, caught between hope and inevitability. The teenager was different, less guarded, more absorbed in their own bubble. Their hands moved with precision, guiding a pixelated character through an endless maze. The Watcher wondered what the game meant to them. Was it an escape? A rebellion against a world that demanded too much too soon? Or perhaps it was just a distraction, a way to kill time until the next thing, whatever that might be, came along. In the Watcher's mind, the teenager became a knight in shining armor. Their phone transformed into a sword. They battled faceless monsters in a darkened forest, each victory a small, fleeting triumph against the chaos of adolescence. But even knights grew tired, and the forest never truly ended. The Watcher paused, looking down at the sketches. They were unfinished, rough outlines waiting to be filled with detail. Much like the passengers themselves, they were fragments of a larger story, incomplete and unknowable. The Watcher wondered if they were any different. Was their own solitude a choice, or had they too been drawn into the endless scroll of distractions, only to break free in search of something more tangible? The train lurched forward and the Watcher's pencil wavered on the page. A voice announced the next station, flat and impersonal, and yet it seemed to echo with a strange significance. The Watcher glanced around the carriage again, catching a fleeting moment of connection. A child looking up from their screen to ask their mother a question. A pair of strangers exchanging an awkward smile as one accidentally bumped the other's knee. These moments were small, almost imperceptible, but they lingered. The watcher made a note in the margin of his sketchbook. Connection is fragile, but it exists. As the train sped through the city, the watcher returned to his sketches, determined to capture what the world so often overlooked: the quiet humanity hidden in the spaces between. Chapter 2. The Glow of Screens. The train carriage felt like a cocoon, darkened, enclosed, yet buzzing with muted energy. The watcher leaned back in his seat, letting their gaze wander over the passengers. The world outside was a blur of fading twilight and streaking lights, but inside, the train glowed with the cold illumination of screens. Faces, young and old, were bathed in that faint bluish hue, as though every passenger carried their own private lighthouse guiding them away from the present moment. The glow wasn't harsh, it was soft, almost hypnotic. The watcher found it beautiful in an unsettling way, an artificial kind of beauty, like moonlight that had lost its warmth. The screens seemed to hold their passengers captive, pulling their attention inward, away from the world and from each other. The watcher thought of fireflies in a jar, tiny, self-contained worlds of light flickering against the glass. A young man 2 rows ahead tilted his phone, angling the screen away from anyone who might be watching. His thumb swiped rhythmically, his eyes scanning something intently. The watcher couldn't see what he was looking at, but his body language told a story. Shoulders tight, head slightly lowered, lips pressing together as if to stifle a reaction. Was it a secret conversation? A text he wished he hadn't received? Or perhaps something darker, something he wouldn't want others to know? The watcher imagined him typing a confession to someone he could no longer face in person. To the watcher's left, a middle-aged woman sat hunched over her tablet. She was scrolling slowly, her finger pausing now and then as though reluctant to move forward. Her face was lined with faint creases, laugh lines maybe, though they seemed frozen in a neutral expression. The watcher guessed she was looking at old photographs. There was a wistful air about her, like she was trying to hold on to something just out of reach. Perhaps the photos were of a family reunion, or a loved one she'd lost. The watcher sketched her in their mind, a solitary figure standing in a room filled with fading Polaroids, each one glowing faintly before slipping into darkness. A teenager sat across the aisle, headphones clamped over their ears, their hoodie pulled up like armor. They were tapping along to a rhythm only they could hear, their head nodding slightly in time. The watcher wondered what song was playing. Was it a pounding anthem of rebellion or a soothing melody to drown out the world? The teenager didn't seem lost in the music, but rather hidden by it, as if it were a shield against the unwelcome gaze of strangers. The watcher pictured them as a silhouette walking through a forest, the music their only guide through a maze of tangled trees. The train jolted slightly, and the glow of screens flickered across the carriage like waves disturbed by a sudden ripple. A man in a suit grumbled softly as he adjusted his phone, muttering under his breath about bad reception. He seemed impatient, checking his watch every few seconds, but there was something vulnerable in the way he pinched the bridge of his nose. The watcher imagined him scrolling through emails, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one a demand for his time, his energy, his very soul. In their mind, the watcher transformed him into a figure running on a treadmill, desperately trying to keep pace with a clock that refused to stop. But the screens didn't just hide. They revealed too in small, unintentional ways. A woman in the far corner smiled faintly at her phone, her eyes softening as she typed a message. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as though she were choosing her words with care. The watcher imagined the recipient of her message. A partner waiting at home, perhaps, or a friend who had made her laugh earlier that day. Her screen, unlike the others, seemed to hold a piece of joy, a glimmer of connection that had escaped the digital void. And yet, even in that moment of connection, the glow of her screen created a barrier. The watcher could see her smile, but it wasn't shared with anyone in the carriage. It was private, locked away behind pixels and text bubbles. The watcher thought of how many smiles, frowns, and tears were hidden this way, visible only to screens. It was as if the train carried not passengers, but echoes, reflections of lives lived elsewhere, captured and muted by technology. The watcher pulled out his sketchbook, his pencil hovering over the blank page. He wanted to capture this scene, but how? How could he draw the glow of screens and the shadows it cast on human faces? How could he capture the way light illuminated isolation, making it feel both intimate and infinite? The Watcher began with simple shapes: a head bent forward, a rectangle of light, fingers frozen mid-swipe. He sketched the teenager next, headphones like a barrier, their face turned inward. The middle-aged woman became a silhouette surrounded by faintly glowing memories. And the suited man, he was drawn running endlessly toward a vanishing horizon. The train slowed as it approached the next station, the wheels groaning softly against the tracks. A faint voice over the intercom announced the stop, pulling a few passengers out of their trance. Some glanced up briefly, their eyes adjusting to the dim light beyond their screens. For a moment, the Watcher caught a glimpse of something raw and unfiltered. A yawn, a sigh, a fleeting look of exhaustion. But just as quickly, they returned to their devices, the glow pulling them back into its comforting embrace. The Watcher closed his sketchbook, staring at the faces around him. The glow of screens had transformed the train into something otherworldly, a space suspended between reality and the digital ether. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a reminder of something lost. The Watcher leaned back, letting the hum of the train wash over them, and made a note in his mind. The glow is both a light and a shadow, and we are caught somewhere in between. Chapter 3. A Symphony of Notifications. The train was alive with sound. Not the mechanical clatter of wheels on tracks or the faint whine of the engine, but a symphony of humanity filtered through devices. The Watcher sat still, ears attuned to the rising and falling rhythm of modern life as expressed in pings, dings, vibrations, and muffled voices. Somewhere near the front of the carriage, a phone buzzed insistently against a hard surface, rattling like an impatient insect. Its owner, a man in his 30s wearing a weathered backpack, scrambled to silence it. His movements were frantic, almost embarrassed, as if the noise was a betrayal of his intention to disappear into the background. The Watcher imagined the message: "Don't forget the meeting at 3 p.m. or can you pick up milk on your way home?" The kind of small, urgent demands that stacked up endlessly, creating a life more managed than lived. Behind the Watcher, the faint sound of a voice filter bled through headphones. A teenager was immersed in a game, muttering under their breath as their thumbs tapped out commands at an erratic pace. The clicks and beeps of the game added to the cacophony, their rhythm punctuated by occasional bursts of frustration. "No, no, no!" or "Come on!" The Watcher turned slightly, catching a glimpse of the screen, a brightly colored avatar leaping over obstacles in a world that seemed far more exciting than the mundane stretch of steel rails. Further down the aisle, the sharp chime of a notification cut through the air, followed immediately by a woman's voice, barely audible as she whispered into her phone. "I'm on the train. No, I can't talk long." She paused, glancing around the carriage as though fearful of being overheard, though no one was paying attention. "We'll talk tonight, I promise." Her voice was soft, careful, yet there was an edge to it, a tension that the Watcher recognized. The conversation was over in seconds, leaving behind the faint hiss of static as she removed her earbuds and leaned her head against the window. The symphony continued, each sound adding to the layered composition. A man in a gray hoodie swiped at his phone screen, the faint whoosh of a sent message followed by a low ding in response. His face remained impassive as he typed again, faster this time, his fingers flying over the glass surface. The Watcher imagined the urgency behind those words. An argument, perhaps, or a desperate attempt to reconnect with someone slipping further away. Some sounds were more subdued but no less present. The steady hum of a vibration, ignored for too long, grew louder in the quiet corners of the train. The occasional thunk of a phone being set down too hard, the crisp click of a keyboard case snapping into place, the muted hiss of audio leaking from headphones, all of it blended into a strange, asynchronous harmony. What struck the Watcher most was how the noise filled the space, yet the people making it remained isolated, islands unto themselves. No one acknowledged the symphony they were creating together. The man typing furiously never noticed the woman on the phone. The teenager with the game didn't glance up as the man in the hoodie sighed loudly, his message unanswered. Each person was locked in their own rhythm, their own melody, and the train became an orchestra without a conductor, playing a piece that never quite resolved. The Watcher closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over them. There was something haunting about this symphony, something that felt both intimate and alien. It was a soundtrack of connection and disconnection, a representation of lives lived through devices. The sounds weren't just noises, they were stories. The watcher thought of the man with the buzzing phone, the way his hand had trembled slightly as he silenced it. What was he so afraid of? Was it the weight of another responsibility? Or was it the absence of a message he hoped for? The emptiness that notifications could never fill. In the watcher's mind, he became a figure standing in a sea of blank envelopes, each one a promise unfulfilled. The woman on the phone lingered in the watcher's thoughts, too. Her voice had carried a kind of sorrow, a longing that couldn't be contained by words. What did she promise to talk about tonight? A fight with a partner? A secret she wasn't ready to share? The watcher imagined her sitting in a darkened room, her phone resting on the table as she stared at it, willing it to ring. And the teenager with the game, what were they escaping? The watcher pictured them as a character in their own virtual world, dodging obstacles and collecting rewards, all while the real world blurred into the background. The game wasn't just entertainment, it was a shield, a way to shut out the noise that wasn't their own. As the train slowed to its next station, the symphony shifted. New passengers boarded, bringing with them their own sounds. A ringtone playing the first notes of a pop song, a mechanical voice announcing a GPS destination, the sharp snap of a phone case closing. The existing passengers barely stirred, adjusting slightly in their seats as the rhythm adjusted around them. The watcher wondered if anyone else heard it, this strange music of modern life. But then, in a rare moment, something unexpected happened. The train lurched, and a phone slipped from the hands of the woman across the aisle. It hit the floor with a sharp clatter, and for a brief second the symphony paused. The woman bent down to retrieve it, and her eyes met the watcher's. She smiled awkwardly, muttering an apology as she straightened up. The watcher nodded, a silent acknowledgement. It was a small thing, a fleeting connection in a sea of disconnection, but it lingered. As the woman returned to her phone, her fingers moving once again over the screen, the watcher made a note in his sketchbook. Even in the noise, there is silence. Even in the silence, there is music.